A billionaire saw his ex-girlfriend, the one he got pregnant 5 years ago, begging under the relentless rain, with kids that looked just like him. It's a scene that hits hard, right? You can almost feel the weight of that moment, can't you? Hashtag, the gilded throne of grief. The rain over Lagos wasn't just falling. It was like a relentless assault. It hammered against the bulletproof glass of Deji's Bentley Bentayga with a fury that felt personal, a drumming that echoed the hollow beat inside his chest. At just 24, he was one of the youngest billionaires on the continent, a figure of awe and speculation. But inside this fortress of leather and polished walnut, he felt less like a king and more like a ghost haunting a museum of his own life. It's wild how wealth can feel so empty, right? 2 years had passed since that phone call shattered his world. The private jet, once a symbol of his family's success, had become a coffin of memories. His father, Tund Adeniran, the formidable industrialist, his mother, Biola, the elegant social architect, and his kid sister, Faisala, with dreams of becoming a filmmaker, gone. Just like that, swallowed by a storm over the Atlantic, leaving behind a silence so vast it felt like a black hole. Deji stared out at the blurred landscape of Victoria Island. The neon signs of banking houses and luxury boutiques bled into watery smears. He was returning from another board meeting at Adeniran Holdings, a soaring glass and steel edifice that now felt like a tomb. The directors, older men who had once called his father Sir, looked at him with pity and sharp calculation. It was his empire now, but it felt like a crushing weight. Every decision, every signature on a billion-naira contract, every strategic pivot, was shadowed by the question, what would Dad do? That silent echo haunted him. His wealth was staggering. It was in oil blocks, sprawling real estate, tech startups, and agricultural empires. It could buy anything, except the one thing he truly needed, a yesterday. It couldn't bring back the sound of his mother's laughter in their Ikoyi mansion or retrieve those heated debates with his father about market trends, debates that always ended with a proud clap on his shoulder. It couldn't resurrect the silly TikTok dances Faisala would force him to do, which he secretly loved. As the car slid past a restaurant where families gathered, their faces animated behind the steam of fragrant soups, a profound loneliness gripped Deji. It was a physical pain, like a stone lodged in his chest. He was the last Adeniran, the dynasty funneled down to a single, young, desperately sad man in a silent car. Emeka, his driver and a remnant from his father's time, glanced in the rearview mirror. The rain is really stubborn today, Oga, he said gently. He had seen Deji grow into a man under the weight of unimaginable loss. Deji didn't reply. His breath fogged the cold window as he thought of the empty mansion awaiting him. Staff would bow. Dinner would be laid out. A feast for one. The gallery of family portraits would watch him eat. His father's stern, proud gaze would follow him from the wall, a constant, silent auditor. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of naira and dollars, in seeded oil shares, drowning in expectations, drowning in a silence so profound he sometimes caught himself listening for the sound of his own heartbeat, just to confirm he was still alive. The gilded throne of his inheritance was cold, hard, and monstrously lonely. He was a billionaire who owned the world, yet possessed nothing at all. The rain outside was a gray curtain, and he was a prisoner in a golden cage, driving slowly through a city that belonged to him, toward a home that never would. Hashtag, a ghost in the downpour. Traffic on Eco Avenue congealed into a honking, steaming river of steel, trapped by the fury of the rain. The world outside Deji's window was like a watercolor painting left in the gutter, all blurred taillights and the grim, determined shapes of pedestrians hunched under awnings and makeshift covers. Emeka sighed, a soft sound of frustration swallowed by the Bentley's sublime soundproofing. This one go hold us for here small, Oga. The gutter for front Don block. Deji gave a barely perceptible nod, his eyes skimming the chaotic scene without interest. His mind drifted back to the boardroom, replaying the skeptical arch of an elder director's brow. A boy playing king. The thought was a familiar, bitter acid in his throat. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a stubborn patch of color in the monochrome wash. Not far from the car, under the scant shelter of a mama-put canteen's rusty awning, a woman stood. She held a small, torn umbrella, its canvas so frayed it offered more symbol than shelter. Her focus wasn't on her own soaked shoulders, but on the three small figures clustered around her legs like chicks to a hen. Even through the distortion of rain-streaked glass, the desperation in her posture was a clear, sharp language. She wasn't just waiting out the storm, she was pleading with it. Her free hand moved in a gentle, persistent motion toward the few people scurrying past, a gesture of offering, of asking. She held something small and dark in her palm. Akira, perhaps, or just an open, empty hand. But it was her profile, the defiant angle of her chin as she turned to shush one of the boys, that sent a jolt through Deiji's nervous system, electric and unsettling. It was a silhouette from a buried past. A memory, sweet and painful, clawed its way up from the depths where he'd tried to drown it. Kayamika. The name arrived in his mind fully formed, accompanied by the scent of university library dust and the taste of stolen, sugary puff-puff. Her laugh, a sound so bright it could cut through the gloomiest Lagos afternoon. The feel of her hand in his, small and confident, as they walked through the Unilag campus, dreaming dreams that felt as vast as the sky. For 5 years, he had walled off that part of his heart. It was a chamber sealed with the mortar of guilt and parental decree. He had let her go. He had been made to let her go. His breath hitched. He leaned forward, his forehead almost touching the cold glass, wiping a clear circle with his sleeve. "Emika," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, thin, strained. "Oga." He couldn't look away. The woman tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear with a weary, graceful motion that was so uniquely her. It was Kayamika, but a Kayamika sanded down by hardship, her vibrancy muted beneath layers of exhaustion and soaked Ankara. The girl who once debated political philosophy with ferocious joy was now begging in the rain. And the children, 3 little boys, pressed against her. Their clothes were wet, clinging to small frames. Even from this distance, he could see their eyes, wide and watchful, taking in the hostile world from the fragile safety of her shadow. Deiji's heart raced as memories flooded back, moments of laughter, dreams, and the bright future they once envisioned together. He remembered the way they would sit on the grass, sharing secrets and aspirations, feeling invincible. How had it come to this? How had life twisted their paths so drastically? As he watched, the rain continued to fall, but it wasn't just water. It felt like a torrent of regrets, washing away the dreams they once shared. He felt a tug in his chest, a desire to reach out, to do something, anything. But what could he do? He was a billionaire, yes, but in this moment, he felt powerless. The light turned green, and Emika eased the car forward, but Deiji's gaze remained fixed on Kayamika. She caught his eye for just a fleeting moment, and in that instant, the world around him faded. It was just the two of them, locked in a silent conversation of shared history and unspoken pain. "Stop the car," he finally said, his voice firmer now. Emika glanced back, surprise etched on his face. "Oga, just stop," Deiji insisted, his heart pounding with urgency. The car came to a halt, and Deiji swung open the door, stepping into the downpour without a second thought. The rain soaked through his designer suit in an instant, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the woman standing there, struggling against the storm, fighting for her children. "Kayamika," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos of the rain. She turned, her eyes widening in shock. Deiji. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with memories and lost time. He rushed toward her, his heart racing, and the world around them faded into a blur. The rain continued to fall, but it felt like a cleansing, washing away the years of separation, the guilt, and the pain. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I'm managing," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What are you doing here?" "I saw you," he said, glancing down at the children clinging to her. "I had to come." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world lifted. A cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning seeped into Deiji's bones, a chill that felt like a warning, wrapping around him tighter with each passing second. The timeline he had avoided for so long, a calculation he had never dared to make, unfolded with brutal, logical clarity. 5 years. The boys looked about, their innocence a stark contrast to the weight of his thoughts. No, the thought was too immense, too terrifying. It was a seismic shift in the landscape of his soul. The grief he carried was for a family lost, memories like ghosts haunting him in the quiet moments. What if, what if a family had been waiting all along, hidden behind the walls he had built to protect himself? Stop the car, he whispered, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. Olga here? We cannot park here. The rain is too much and… Emika, stop the siren now. The command burst forth like a dam breaking, a roar ripped from a place of pure, unthinking instinct. It shattered the tomb-like silence of the vehicle. Emika, wide-eyed and startled, jerked the wheel, pulling the massive SUV haphazardly toward the flooded curb, tires splashing through the puddles like a chaotic dance. Deji didn't wait for the door to be opened. He fumbled for the handle, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped out into the deluge. The cold rain instantly plastered his tailored suit to his skin, but he didn't feel it. All he could feel was the pounding of his heart, a drumbeat of urgency. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The honking cars, the shouting drivers, the drumming rain, all faded into a muted roar. His entire being was focused on the woman under the leaking awning, the embodiment of his past, and the living, breathing possibilities huddled at her feet. He began to walk toward her, each step a movement away from the gilded cage and into the storm of a truth he had spent 5 years running from. The rain was a physical barrier, 1,000 cold needles against his skin, but Deji moved through it as if in a dream. The distance between the Bentley's open door and the leaking awning felt like a bridge across 5 years, a journey that spanned both time and emotion. With each step, the polished CEO of Adeniran Holdings dissolved, and in his place stumbled the 19-year-old boy he'd once been, a boy named Deji, desperately in love. The memory was no longer a buried artifact. It was a vivid, painful flashback that superimposed itself over the wet Lagos street. 5 years earlier, Unilag campus. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flamboyant trees and frying akara from the vendor near the faculty building. Deji, dressed in simple jeans and a polo shirt, his attempt at inconspicuousness, held Kayamika's hand as they walked. Her hand was warm, her fingers laced confidently through his, and in that moment, the world felt perfect. They were young, full of dreams, and wrapped in the intoxicating haze of first love. Every laugh shared, every secret whispered, felt like a promise of forever. It was a time when the future was a bright canvas, waiting for them to paint their story together. So, if you become the Minister of Finance, she was saying, her eyes alight with the game, your first move cannot be to remove the fuel subsidy. It's political suicide. You have to build a social infrastructure net first. He laughed, squeezing her hand. My practical revolutionary. And what will you be doing while I'm navigating political suicide? Running a rival party. Me? She grinned, the smile that always made his stomach flip. I'll be the investigative journalist exposing all the corrupt contracts you will inevitably sign. For the good of the people, of course. They were in their final year, their futures a glittering, shared canvas. His was preordained, an MBA abroad, then a slow, guided ascent into Adeniran Holdings. Hers was self-made, a law degree, a voice for the voiceless. They were a perfect, combustible blend of privilege and principle, and they believed, with the foolish, absolute certainty of youth, that love was the most powerful class of all. Then, one evening in her small, neat off-campus room, the axis of their world tilted. Kayamika's usual radiant energy was subdued, replaced by a quiet, trembling anxiety. She'd missed her period. 2 tests, bought from different chemists, confirmed it. A silent, shared stare held a universe of panic and a flicker of wonder. We'll be okay, Deji said, his voice thick with a fear he tried to mask as conviction. We'll tell my parents. They'll understand. We'll get married sooner, that's all. Kayamika's eyes held his, searching for the truth beneath the bravado. She knew of his parents by reputation only, Tund and Biola Adeniran, pillars of industry and high society, their names synonymous with a Lagos that was galaxies away from her own struggling, proud middle-class upbringing in Enugu. A week later, in the soaring, coldly elegant sitting room of the Adeniran Ikoyi mansion, Deji learned how naive he had been. He stood before his parents, Kayamika beside him, her courage a palpable force in the sterile air. His father did not raise his voice. Tund Adeniran's power was in his stillness, in the icy precision of his words. Pregnant, he stated, as if diagnosing a faulty engine. This is unfortunate. Deji, you have a destiny. It does not involve being derailed by a village temptation. The word village hung in the air, a deliberate, brutal reduction of Kayamika's world, her family, her brilliance. His mother, Viola, was the strategist. Her voice was smoother, deadlier. My son, think. What life can you give her now? What life can she give you? You are from different worlds. This child would be an anchor, dragging you both down. She turned a pitying gaze on Kayamika. You seem like a sensible girl. You must see this as a dead end. Deji protested, his voice cracking. I love her. We'll make it work. Love. His father cut him off, a sharp, dismissive gesture. Love does not build empires. Love does not protect a legacy. This is not a discussion. It is a situation we will resolve. The resolution was presented 2 days later. They summoned Kayamiko alone. Deji was locked in his room, his phones confiscated. He learned later what happened. The envelope of cash, more money than her teacher parents saw in a year, placed on the table. The clear, unemotional instruction: terminate the pregnancy. This money is for your future, a cleaner future. And then, the final, surgical cut. Before Kayamika could even respond, before Deji could break free and defy them, he was whisked to the airport. A first-class ticket to Cambridge, a new phone, a new bank account, and a single, cold order: focus on your studies. This chapter is closed. He had looked back, once, as he was ushered through the departure gates, a frantic, helpless search for her face in the crowd. But she wasn't there. He was alone, carried away by the inexorable tide of his family's will, leaving the girl he loved and the child they'd made to face the storm alone. The memory shattered as his Gucci loafers hit a deep puddle, splashing icy water up his leg. He was back in the present, soaked and shivering, standing just 10 feet from the awning. The girl from the memory was now a woman etched by hardship, and the single child they had discussed was now 3 small boys staring at him with his own eyes. The cruel edict of class had not just separated them. It had built a wall behind which an entire, hidden family had grown, while he remained a lonely king in an empty palace. The bribe and the banishment. The sterile chill of his father's study was a different kind of cold from the Lagos rain. But as Deji stood dripping under the canteen awning, the two sensations merged into one pervasive dread. The memory of that day, long suppressed, now played with cruel clarity against the backdrop of Kayamika's shivering form. 5 years earlier, the Adeniran mansion, Ikoyi. Deji was not present for the meeting. His parents had seen to that. They'd had his driver take him to a surprise lunch at the Lagos Yacht Club, a ploy so transparent it was insulting. When he returned, buzzing with a plan to run away with Kayamika, to forsake it all, he found his world already dismantled. His mother met him in the grand foyer, her expression unreadable, a carved mask of calm. It's done, she said, her voice low and final. We've taken care of the situation. She was reasonable. Taken care of? Deji's voice rose, echoing off the marble. What did you do? Where is she? His father emerged from the study, a cigar in hand, the picture of grim satisfaction. We offered her a solution and compensation. Enough to start a proper life. Far more than she could ever hope to earn. She accepted. It's over, Deji. The word accepted was a knife. He couldn't believe it. Not as fierce, principled Kayamika. I need to see her. I need to talk to her. You will do no such thing, his father thundered, the calm veneer cracking. You have embarrassed this family enough. Your flight to Cambridge leaves tonight. You will go, you will study, and you will forget this distraction. The next hours were a blur of impotent rage. They'd taken his phone. The landlines were monitored. His personal driver was replaced by 2 stern, unfamiliar men from his father's security team. He was a prisoner in his own home, a prince under house arrest. He wrote a letter, a frantic, tear-smeared plea, and begged a sympathetic housemaid to take it to Kayamika's hostel. He never knew if the girl was too afraid or if the letter was intercepted. He never heard back. That night, they drove him to the airport, not through the bustling main terminal, but through a private VIP wing, which felt eerily quiet and oppressively smooth. There was no crowd to lose himself in, no chance to bolt away from the reality that was closing in on him. His mother leaned in and kissed his cheek, her perfume a cloying scent that felt like betrayal. This is for the best, Omomi, she whispered. her voice trembling just a bit. "One day you'll thank us." But deep down, he wondered if he ever would. His father's farewell was different. A hand on his shoulder, a grip that felt like steel, solid and unyielding. "Make us proud. The future of everything I've built rests on you. Do not look back." Those words hung in the air, heavy with expectation and pressure. He was escorted onto the plane like cargo, as if he were just another item to be shipped away. As the jet climbed over the glittering darkness of Lagos, the city that held his heart shrank to a pinprick of light, then vanished completely. He pressed his forehead against the cold window and wept, not just for Kayamika and their child, but for the boy he once was, who had been so easily erased from existence. The envelope of money they'd given her felt like a transaction that had purchased his soul, and he hadn't even been there to sign the papers. It was as if he was banished, not just from a country, but from his own life, carrying the corrosive guilt of his compliance and the haunting, unanswered question of what taken care of truly meant. Suddenly, the memory snapped like a taut wire, and he was jolted back into the roaring present. The rain fell around him, a tangible echo of that old helplessness. But now, he was not a boy being led away. He was a man standing his ground. The solution was shivering before him, not terminated, but multiplied into 3 living, breathing testaments to her courage and his failure. The bribe had failed. The banishment was over. And the truth, in the form of 3 sets of his own eyes staring back at him, was finally demanding an answer. A choice of life. Deiji's memory of his own powerlessness was a sharp, internal shard, one that cut deep. But as he finally closed the distance under the awning, his gaze locked on Kayamika's rain-streaked face. His mind recoiled from the narrative his parents had sold him. She accepted. Those words now tasted like ash in his mouth. Because the proof of her true choice was clinging to her legs. 3 little boys who were living embodiments of that choice. His imagination, fueled by a sudden, desperate need to know, painted the scene his parents had orchestrated and from which he'd been shielded. 5 years earlier, a quiet cafe in Surulere. Kayamika had been summoned by a terse, impersonal call from a family assistant. She arrived, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, clutching the small hope that Deiji would be there, that they would face this together. Instead, she found Biola Adeniran, not in the intimidating Ikoyi mansion, but in a discreet, upscale cafe, a neutral territory that felt just as hostile. Deiji's mother sat perfectly poised, a cup of untouched tea before her. She did not offer Kayamika a seat at first, letting her stand, feeling the weight of the scrutiny bearing down on her. "You're a smart girl, Kayamika," Biola began, her voice devoid of warmth. "I've seen your grades. You have potential. That is why what is about to happen is a tragedy, for you and for my son." She pushed a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table. It was bulky, its contents obvious, and Kayamika's heart sank as she realized what was happening. "Inside is 5 million naira," Biola stated, watching her face for a reaction. "It is more money than your parents will see in 5 years. It is a gift, a chance." Kayamika's eyes flicked from the envelope to Biola's impassive face. Her mouth felt dry, her heart racing. "A chance for what, Ma?" "A chance to be sensible. To terminate this complication. To take this money, continue your education somewhere good, and build a proper life for yourself. A life with a future. If you try to cling to Deiji, you will destroy him. His father will disinherit him. His path will be ruined. And you," she let the word hang, "you will be a teenage mother with no support, a university dropout, a burden to your own family. Is that the life you want for your child? One of struggle and shame?" Each word was a calculated blow, targeting every fear Kayamika had wrestled with in the dark. The picture Biola painted was horrifyingly plausible. It was as if she had taken all of Kayamika's insecurities and laid them bare for inspection. "And Deiji," Kayamika whispered, her voice trembling. "What does he want?" A flicker of impatience crossed Biola's features. "Deiji wants what is best for the family legacy. He is young, he is confused by sentiment, but he will come to see this is the only way. He has already agreed to go abroad. It is done." Agreed. That word was a nail in a coffin. Kayamika felt the world she'd built with Deiji, the dreams, the debates, the love, crumble into dust around her. She looked at the envelope. 5 million naira. It was an escape hatch from a life of certain hardship. It was also blood money for her own child. A strange, cold clarity settled over her then. The panic receded, replaced by a steely resolve that surprised even her. She saw not a gift, but seed capital. Not for an ending, but for a terrifying, solitary beginning. She reached out. Her fingers did not tremble as they closed around the envelope. She saw Biola's lips relax into a faint, satisfied smile, the smile of a problem solved. But Kayamika did not smile back. She met the older woman's eyes, and in her own, there was no gratitude, no defeat. There was a fierce, unyielding fire. "Thank you, Ma," she said, her voice now steady and formal. She stood, tucking the envelope into her bag. She gave a slight, stiff nod and turned. She walked out of the cafe, the weight of the money a physical anchor in her bag, not for a procedure, but for a plan. She would keep her child. She would use their bribe to build a life for them. It was not acceptance. It was a declaration of war, fought with the enemy's own resources. Back in the present, standing in the drumming rain, Deiji looked from Kayamika's defiant, exhausted face to the three small boys who were the living fruit of that defiant choice. His parents had seen a transaction. She had seen a future. They had paid for an erasure. She had invested in a life. The magnitude of her courage and the depth of his own family's cruel miscalculation struck him with a force that left him breathless. The envelope had not ended their story. It had merely funded her solo, heroic rewrite of it. Exile and a secret. The rain was a curtain, isolating them under the tin awning. Kayamika's face, a mask of shock and ancient hurt, was all Deiji could see. But his mind was reeling back, following the path she must have walked after that day in the cafe, a path paid for with his family's guilt money. 5 years earlier, in Nugu. The envelope felt like a live coal in Kayamika's bag during the long bus ride home. She didn't go to her hostel. She went straight to her parents' modest bungalow in the Independence layout. She hoped for a sanctuary, for understanding, but that hope died the moment she told them. Her father, a secondary school principal with rigid notions of propriety, stared at her as if she'd spoken in tongues. "Pregnant? And the boy's family, they paid you." The disgust in his voice was thicker than the humid evening air. "You have sold yourself, in WAM? You have brought shame into this house with a bribe." Her mother wept, but they were tears of disappointment, not comfort. What will people say? A university girl, throwing her future away. And for a rich Lagos boy who has already discarded you. Kayamika felt the walls closing in, her parents' disappointment wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. The shame was palpable, pressing down on her chest. She wanted to scream, to tell them how hard it had been, how she had fought for her love, for Deiji, and for their future. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood there, feeling small and lost, the weight of the envelope heavy in her bag, a constant reminder of the choice she had made. The conversations that followed were filled with anger and blame. Her father railed against the injustice of it all, while her mother tried to maintain some semblance of dignity, even as her heart broke for her daughter. Kayamika felt like a ghost, drifting through their accusations and fears, unable to connect with the people who should have understood her the most. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was pregnant, yes, but she was also determined. The arguments raged for days, swirling around the family parlor like a storm waiting to break. That envelope, oh man, it sat there on the table, a monstrous, silent accuser, daring anyone to touch it. Her father's ultimatum was brutally simple. Take the money, fix the problem, and they'd help her get back to school. But if she chose to keep the pregnancy, well, she was on her own. It felt like she was a stain on their hard-won respectability, and the pressure was suffocating. The night she finally left, she felt a mix of fear and determination. That envelope. It was back in her bag, along with a few clothes, her certificates, and a photograph of herself and Deiji, taken at a campus carnival. In the picture, their faces were bright, filled with dreams and a future they thought they owned. She left a note behind. "I have chosen life. I am sorry for the shame. I will not trouble you again." It was her way of saying goodbye, but it also felt like a declaration of independence. Lagos was a different kind of storm, a city bursting with millions where she knew absolutely no one. She found a tiny room in a face me I face you building in Ajij. The walls were so thin she could hear every neighbor's quarrel, every laugh, every argument. It was overwhelming, but it was also a new beginning. The first thing she bought with the Adeniran money wasn't medicine or baby clothes. It was a sturdy, second-hand grinding machine. Her mother had used it for the Acra and Pap business, a survival trick that felt like a lifeline. It was a language of resilience she now understood perfectly. As days turned into weeks, she became a ghost of her former self. The vibrant Unilag student was gone, replaced by a woman who woke before dawn to soak beans. Her world shrank to the dimensions of her hot griddle and the growing swell of her belly. Each day, she saved every naira not spent on Gary and beans, tucking it away like bricks in a fortress she was building for her child. A scan? That felt like an unimaginable luxury. The money for that could buy a month's supply of baby pap. The hospital would tell her what she needed to know when the time came. Her faith was in God, her hands, and the stubborn life growing inside her. She was carrying one child to love, one child to save for. The thought of more never crossed her mind. Her struggle was calculated for a single mouth to feed, a single school fee to pay. The memory of Deji was a wound she couldn't afford to poke. She convinced herself he had willingly agreed, that he saw her and their baby as the complication his mother had described. The pain of that thought was a daily companion, but she transformed it into fuel. For this child, his child, she would be both mother and father. She didn't need anyone else. Back under the awning, Deji looked at her chapped hands, at the defiant set of her shoulders that had carried a universe of solitude. He didn't just see a beggar in the rain. He saw a general who had fought a 5-year war with an enemy's resources, exiled from her home, fortified by a secret love she believed was unrequited. She had been saving for one, planning for one, loving one. The terrifying, beautiful truth of the triplets was a secret the universe had kept even from her, a final, overwhelming plot twist in her story of solitary courage. As the rain continued its relentless tattoo on the corrugated iron, it became the soundtrack to Deji's stunned reality. Standing before Kayamika, the ghost of her past struggle was so vivid he could almost smell the hot oil and ground beans from her Ajij room. But his mind raced ahead, to the moment her meticulously planned, singular world shattered. 4 years and 9 months earlier, Massey Street Children's Hospital, Lagos Island. The pain was a white-hot universe, consuming everything. The taxi ride had been a blur of clenched teeth and silent prayers. In the stark, overbright delivery room, the midwife's voice was a calm command against the storm in her body. "Push, mummy. Push. I can see the head." Kayamika pushed, pouring every ounce of her strength, her fear, her lonely hope into the act. A final, searing effort, and a cry pierced the air, a thin, furious, beautiful wail. A wave of euphoric relief washed over her. "My child. My one child." Tears of exhaustion and joy mixed on her cheeks. She collapsed back, spent, a smile touching her lips. It was over. She had done it. But the midwife's hands were still busy. Her expression, previously focused, shifted to one of intense concentration. "Wait, mummy, wait, oh, don't rest yet. There is another head." Another head? The words made no sense, swirling in her haze of relief. She tried to process them as a strange buzzing filled her ears. "What?" she gasped. "Twins. You are carrying twins. Push now. Push." The instruction cut through the fog. A new, different terror, laced with impossible wonder, seized her. She pushed again, a scream torn from a deeper, more primal place. Another cry joined the first, harmonizing into a duet of new life. She sobbed, laughing and crying, her body trembling with shock. Two babies. Her calculations, her savings, her everything, it was all wrong. It was double. The world spun. But the midwife was not done. Her eyes were wide now, her voice rising with disbelief. "Holy Father. Mummy, stop. Do not push. Do not push." Kayamika froze, terror icing her veins. Something was wrong. The midwife was shouting for a doctor. "There is a third one. I see a foot. Breach. It is breach." The next minutes were a chaotic, painful blur. More staff arrived. Voices overlapped. Instructions flew. The world narrowed to the desperate, burning need to deliver this third, unexpected, tangled child. When the final cry came, weaker, more strained than the others, it was met not with immediate joy, but with a profound, deafening silence of pure shock before a flurry of activity swaddled the baby. Lying in the recovery bay later, utterly shattered, Kayamika stared at the three bundled cocoons in the clear bassinets beside her bed. 1, 2, 3. The numbers held no meaning. They were an abstract, astronomical sum her heart and her savings account could not compute. A deep, trembling awe slowly seeped in, displacing the terror. Triplets. She had given birth to a litter, a tribe. The one she had saved for, prayed for, built her lonely world around, was a triumvirate. The money from the Adonirans, which she had stretched for a single child's future, now had to cover three. The tiny room in Ajij would not fit them. Her plans were ashes. But as she looked at their tiny, wrinkled faces, a fierce, wild love, vaster than any ocean, flooded the ruins of her old plans. It was a love that held terror in its depths, terror of failure, of not being enough. But it was absolute. They were hers. They were his. And they were here, under the awning. Deiji's gaze moved from Kayamika's tear-filled eyes to the three boys. He saw not just children, but miracles wrapped in a survival story so profound it humbled him. He understood now. The shock he saw on her face wasn't just from seeing him. It was the eternal echo of that delivery room, a shock that had never fully receded. She hadn't just carried his child in secret. She had carried and delivered a seismic revelation. The single seed of their love had exploded into a forest, and she had been its lone, steadfast gardener, weathering every storm, including this one, to keep its branches alive. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of their past struggles, Deiji stepped closer, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He reached out, gently touching Kayamika's arm, grounding her in the present. You did it, Kayamika. You brought them into the world. You are stronger than you know. Kayamika looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and fear. I never planned for this, Deiji. I thought I could handle one. Now, I have three, and I'm terrified. Hey, he said softly, you're not alone. We'll figure this out together. You've already shown how fierce you are. These boys are lucky to have you. She took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Maybe she didn't have to carry this burden alone. Maybe, just maybe, they could create a new path together, one filled with love and hope, despite the challenges ahead. As they stood there, the rain falling like a gentle embrace around them, Kayamika felt a flicker of possibility. The journey ahead would be tough, but with Deiji by her side, maybe they could navigate the chaos together. She looked down at her boys, their tiny hands curled into fists, and she knew that whatever came next, she would face it head-on, armed with love and resilience. After all, they were her world now, and she was ready to fight for them. The scaffolding of struggle. The rain began to ease up, shifting from a furious downpour to a steady, weeping drizzle. But the storm brewing inside Deiji was just getting started. As he stood there, water trickling from his chin, the image of Kayamika in a hospital bed with three newborns morphed into something far more daunting. The brutal, grinding arithmetic of the years that must have followed. His mind, usually sharp at analyzing complex financial projections, now turned that cold logic toward her life. He began to build a spreadsheet of her survival, each column filled with agonizing details. Income, profit from Accra and PAP. Maybe, on a really good day, 2,000 naira. But let's be real, that was shaky at best. It was so vulnerable to sickness, unpredictable weather, and the police harassing street vendors. Expenses? Oh boy, they tripled. Diapers, definitely not disposable ones. She'd have to deal with cloth napkins, which meant endless washing. Baby formula? That was a catastrophic cost. Imagine having to switch to PAP early, watering it down just to make it stretch. And medicine? She'd need it for 3 when fevers hit. And don't forget clothing. 3 times the amount, outgrown in the blink of an eye. Assets? Well, let's see. 1 grinding machine. A single room in Ajij. And the dwindling remains of 5 million naira, which would vanish like morning dew under the relentless demands of 3 hungry infants. He could almost picture her days. Dawn wouldn't be a fresh start. It would be a relentless gauntlet. Grinding beans until her arms ached, frying in the humid, smoke-filled air while keeping one eye on 3 crawling boys. Every action was a calculation. If I buy milk for this one, can the other 2 make do with extra pap? If one needs sandals, can the other 2 wait until next month? It was a juggling act, and he saw the invisible scaffolding she must have built, a fragile network of makeshift solutions. Trading childcare hours with another struggling mother in the compound. Mending clothes until the fabric was more thread than cloth. Nights spent not in rest, but in worry, her mind racing ahead to tomorrow's food. Next term school fees for a nursery she couldn't yet afford. Her dreams of law school, of finding her voice, of having her byline. Those dreams would have been buried not with ceremony, but with the quiet exhaustion of each survived day. Her sharp mind, once focused on constitutional law, would now be laser-focused on survival logistics. Finding the cheapest market for tomatoes, figuring out the most nutritious way to stretch a cup of beans, and swallowing her pride to accept the patronizing charity of a church food bank. And through it all, there was the loneliness. Not his kind of loneliness, which came from being in a silent mansion, but a deeper, more profound isolation. Being the only anchor in a churning sea for 3 small lives. No partner to share the fear at midnight when a fever spiked. No one to reassure her she was doing enough when it felt like she wasn't doing nearly enough. Her parents' silence would have been a constant, aching void. Deji glanced at the boys now. Their clothes, though clean, were faded and tight. Alyawadabi's sleeve ended well above his wrist. Their resilience was a testament to her love, but their slightness spoke of 1,000 missed nutrients, of a mother's portion always divided by 3. The sheer, unending effort of it all crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had built empires on paper, moved millions with a signature. She had built lives, brick by invisible brick, with nothing but stubborn love and calloused hands. His struggle had been grief in a penthouse. Hers had been a daily war against scarcity, fought in the trenches, and she had fought it alone for 5 long years, believing the father of her children had willingly abandoned his post. The respect that washed over him was so profound it felt like grief. He hadn't just missed their first steps or their first words. He had missed the entire, heroic campaign of their survival. He saw not a beggar, but a commander, weary from a battle he never knew was being waged. And her troops, his sons, stood beside her, proof of her unbelievable, costly victory. As the drizzle softened to a mist, the cold in Deji's bones became permanent. He absorbed the staggering truth of Kayamika's struggle and his own recent past. The 2 years since his parents' death rushed in, not as a separate tragedy, but as a grotesque, parallel universe of loss. His grief had been conducted in a different key, but it was the same song of abandonment. 2 years earlier, Cambridge and Lagos. The call came during a tutorial on leveraged buyouts. His father's personal assistant, usually so calm, sounded like a raw wire of panic. Deji, there's been an accident. The plane, over the Atlantic. No mayday. No survivors. The world didn't go dark, it went silent. A high-pitched whine replaced all sound. He remembered the feel of the phone, slick and heavy in his hand. The tutor's mouth moved, forming shapes that meant nothing. He was 22. In an instant, the scaffolding of his world, the demanding father, the orchestrating mother, the annoying, brilliant sister, was vaporized. He was no longer a son, a brother. He was just a title, sole heir. The funeral was a blur of black suits and somber, powerful faces offering handshakes that felt like assessments. The family mansion in Ikoyi, once full of simmering tension and quiet power, was now a museum of ghosts. He'd walk the halls, past his mother's pristine orchids, his father's untouched cigar humidor, Faye's movie posters still blue-tacked to her bedroom wall. The silence there was different from Kayamika's struggle silence. His was a silence of echoes, of conversations forever unfinished, of apologies never spoken, of a love that had been expressed only through expectation and was now irredeemably gone. He dropped out of Cambridge. There was no longer a need to prove himself to a father who would never see the report card. He returned to Lagos to take the reins. The boardroom of Adeniran Holdings felt like a stage where he was an understudy who'd never learned the lines. The directors, men with faces like weathered leather, spoke a language of pipelines, mergers, and political risk that was suddenly his native tongue. He signed documents that moved billions, his signature a shaky forgery of his father's confident stroke. He had everything, and it was all ashes. The wealth was a crushing, radioactive inheritance. Every luxury felt like a betrayal. The champagne tasted of tears he couldn't shed. The soft leather of his new car seats felt like the emptiness he carried. He was the king of a hollowed-out kingdom, presiding over a court of financiers, with no family to share the throne, no love to warm the vast, cold chambers of his life. He'd sit in his father's old study, in his father's old chair, and feel like a child playing dress-up. The grief was a lead weight in his chest, but so was the guilt. The guilt for every argument, every resentful thought. The guilt for the life they had forced him into, a life that had now left him utterly alone. And beneath it all, buried under the fresh rubble of their deaths, was the older, festering guilt for Kayamika, a guilt he had never addressed, a wound he had let his parents cauterize with distance and money. Now, under the leaking awning, the two tragedies collided. His parents, who had exiled him from one family, were gone. And here, shivering in the rain, was the family they had tried to erase. He had been mourning the loss of his architects, while the living, breathing results of their most heartless design were begging for scraps just miles from his palace of sorrow. His kingdom was not just built on ashes, it was built on a lie. And the truth, in the form of a woman with eyes full of fire and 3 boys with his face, was staring back at him, waiting for the king to step down from his lonely throne. The eyes that accused the mist hung in the air, a wet veil between Deji and the woman who held his history in her tired hands. The parallel tragedies, his of gilded loss, hers of gritty survival, collided in this single, rain-slicked moment. But it was the children who forced the final, devastating connection. He felt their eyes on him, wide and questioning, like they were searching for answers he didn't have. It was a heavy moment, one that pulled at the threads of his heart. He could see the innocence in their faces, the way they clung to their mother, and it struck him how much they mirrored him. They were his blood, and yet, he felt like a stranger in their lives. Deiji's heart raced as he took a step closer, feeling the weight of their gaze. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to break the ice. "What are your names?" The eldest, a boy with big, curious eyes, stepped forward. "I'm Alyawadabi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And this is my brother, Ao," he continued, pointing to the smaller boy who was hiding behind his mother's leg. "And that's Kunal," he added, gesturing to the baby in Kayamika's arms, who was blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding them. "Nice to meet you, Alyawadabi, Ao." His gaze, which had been locked on Kayamika's face, slowly lowered to the 3 small boys standing there, their wide eyes fixed on him. They had stopped whimpering and now stared at the tall, soaked stranger with a mix of curiosity and apprehension that was unnerving. It felt like the whole world had faded away. The honking cars, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the murmur of other displaced pedestrians, all of it dissolved into a silent, high-resolution focus that made everything else seem distant and irrelevant. In that moment, he saw his father. Alyawadabi, the oldest, stood slightly in front, his small jaw set in a stubborn, defiant line that was pure-tongued Adeniran. It was a look that screamed determination, just like his father when he confronted a troublesome board member. The exact same angle, the same tightness at the corner of his mouth. It was uncanny and heart-wrenching all at once. Then he saw his mother, Alyawadamalade, with those large, luminous eyes, fringed with impossibly long lashes, held a deep, observant intelligence that was unmistakably Biola's. Those eyes missed nothing. They calculated and assessed even from a toddler's face. He could see the weight of the world in those eyes, a silent plea for understanding and connection. And finally, he saw himself, in Alyawazian, whose expression held a touch of vulnerability, a gentle uncertainty beneath the bravery that was so familiar. It was the look Deji saw in his own old childhood photos, before the weight of expectation had hardened him into someone he barely recognized. The innocence in that little face tugged at his heartstrings, and he felt a deep, unsettling ache. But more than the individual features, it was the chorus of their faces together, a triple echo of the Adeniran bloodline, shouting from the gutter. They were living, breathing accusations. Each small face was a verdict on his absence, a monument to Kayamika's endurance, and a perfect, heartbreaking refutation of his parents' cruel philosophy. Not our class. These boys, with their innate nobility and their threadbare clothes, were his class. They were his blood. They were his. A visceral tremor ran through him, starting deep in his core and rattling his rain-chilled frame. It was the tremor of a foundational truth, long buried, finally erupting to the surface. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a maybe. This was a biological certainty as solid and unassailable as the family portrait hanging in his lonely mansion. The guilt he had carried for 5 years, the guilt he had tried to bury under studies and then under grief, broke its chains. It wasn't a dull ache anymore. It was a sharp, twisting blade. He had not just abandoned Kayamika. He had abandoned them. These specific, beautiful, frightened little humans. He had missed their first cries, their first steps, the million daily moments that knit a family together, while he sat in lecture halls and then in boardrooms, a hollow king of nothing. Kayamika's eyes held a different accusation, older, more complex, laced with a pain that had matured like a bitter wine. But the boy's eyes were pure, uncomplicated mirrors. They reflected back at him the man who should have been there. The ghost of the father they had never known, now materialized as a drenched, shocked stranger in a suit worth more than their mother had probably ever held at once. In their wide, watching eyes, Deji didn't see the billionaire, the CEO, the orphaned heir. He saw only the absence. And in that moment, the kingdom of ashes he ruled meant less than the mud under their worn-out sandals. Every accolade, every digit in his bank account, was rendered meaningless by the profound, simple truth staring back at him. He was their father, and he had failed them utterly. The eyes that accused him offered no mercy, only the devastating, clarifying power of truth. Are they mine? The words left his lips not as a question, but as a choked exhalation of dawning horror and awe. They hung in the damp air between them. 3 words that contained 5 years of abandonment, a mountain of guilt, and the terrifying weight of a future suddenly rewritten. Are they mine? He hadn't meant to voice it. The evidence was screaming from their faces, from the brutal, perfect math of their age. But he needed to hear it from her. He needed the truth to come from the source of all this pain and strength, to make the staggering reality official. Kayamika did not answer with words. His question was the final key, turned in a lock she had sealed with survival steel. It shattered the fragile composure she had worn as armor against the rain and the pitying stares of strangers. The defiance in her eyes, the fierce pride that had held her upright through exile and birth and hunger, dissolved. A ragged, wounded sound tore from the depths of her being. It was not a sob of feminine sorrow, but the raw, guttural cry of a wound prodded after years of desperate healing. Her hands flew to her face, her shoulders collapsing inward as if absorbing a physical blow. The torn umbrella slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the flooded pavement with a dull, final splash. The boys, alarmed by the seismic shift in their mother's spirit, erupted into confused whimpers. Alyawadabi grabbed a fistful of her soaked wrapper, his small face crumpling. Alyawadamalade buried his face against her leg. Alyawazian began to cry openly, his sobs a tiny, heartbreaking echo of his mother's. Her tears were the confession. They were the answer to every silent plea he'd never sent, to every unanswered question he'd buried. They were a waterfall of pent-up loneliness, betrayal, backbreaking work, and the sheer, overwhelming terror of raising 3 boys in a world that had shown her only indifference. They were for the nights she'd cried alone, for the dreams she'd incinerated to keep them warm, for the father they asked about in childish terms she could never fully explain. She cried for the girl she had been, whom he had known, and for the woman she had become, whom he was only now, brutally, meeting. Deji stood paralyzed, watching her world break open before him. Her tears were more powerful than any shout, more damning than any curse. They painted the true cost of his parents' decree and his own passivity in vivid, liquid strokes. The proof of his fatherhood was no longer just in the boys' faces. It was in the torrent of her grief. He was the cause of this. His family, his absence, was the rock against which her life had been dashed and from which she had somehow, miraculously, pulled forth these 3 precious stones. The sound of her weeping, mingled with the frightened cries of his sons, cut through the last of his shock. The billionaire, the heir, the grieving orphan, those identities sloughed off like a snakeskin. What remained was something far more primal, far more urgent. He could not undo the years. He could not halt her tears. But he could stop the rain from falling on them for 1 more second. Without another word, his own vision blurred with a heat that had nothing to do with the weather, he moved. The question had been answered. Now, Action was the only language left. He stepped forward, the rain pouring down, but he didn't care. He reached out, wrapping his arms around Kayamika and pulling her close. The warmth of her body, even through the wet fabric, felt like home. He could feel her trembling, and it made his heart ache even more. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm here now." In that moment, he wasn't just a stranger in a suit. He was a father, a husband, a man who had come back to the family he had left behind. He could feel the boys pressing against him, their small bodies seeking comfort and reassurance. It was overwhelming, this rush of emotion, but he held them all tightly, as if he could shield them from the world's harshness. Kayamika's tears soaked into his shirt, and he didn't mind. They were a testament to the pain they had endured, but also a sign of the love that had persisted despite everything. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." Her breath hitched, and he could feel the weight of her grief, the years of struggle and heartache. But there was something else, too, a flicker of hope. Maybe they could start again. Maybe he could be the father they needed, the partner she deserved. The boys looked up at him, their eyes wide and searching. They were still scared, still unsure, but there was a spark of recognition there, too. "Are we really brothers?" Alyawadabi asked, his voice small but filled with a child's curiosity. Deji knelt down, meeting his gaze. "Yes, we are. And I promise I'm going to be here for you. All of you." Alyawadamalade smiled shyly, and even Alyawazian, who had been crying, seemed to calm down a bit. "Can we go home?" Alyawazian asked, his voice trembling. Deji nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Yes, let's go home. Together." As they started to walk, he felt the weight of the world lifting, just a little. The rain was still falling, but the command of redemption, the air was thick with the sound of her grief and the children's fear, creating a haunting symphony of pain that rendered Deji's own turmoil silent. It was as if time had paused, leaving only the raw emotion hanging heavy in the air. Words felt utterly useless now. Explanations, apologies, questions, they were just feathers against the hurricane of her tears, unable to offer any real comfort. All that mattered was removal, extraction from this moment, from this street, from the life that had brought them to this heartbreaking intersection. He stepped forward, his polished loafers sinking into the murky puddle where her umbrella lay discarded, a forgotten remnant of a battle fought long ago. He didn't pick it up. It was a relic of the old struggle, now obsolete and meaningless in the face of the chaos unfolding around them. "Oya," he said, his voice low but carrying a tone of absolute authority that brooked no argument. This wasn't the cold command of his father. It was the urgent, protective directive of a man who had witnessed disaster and was now acting to stop it. "Enter the car. All of you. Get in. Now." He didn't ask. He didn't say please. He issued the instruction as a fact of the new universe he was creating around them, a world where safety was paramount. His gaze swept over the three boys, his sons, their faces slick with rain and tears, reflecting the turmoil of the moment. He gave a short, firm nod toward the idling Bentley, its rear door still hanging open like a promise, the engine purring a low, steady counterpoint to the chaos outside. Kayamika, lost in the vortex of her breakdown, seemed not to hear him. She was folded in on herself, a monument to shattered endurance, and Deji felt a rush of protectiveness surge within him. He acted without thinking. Gently, but with a decisive firmness, he placed a hand on her trembling shoulder. The touch, the first in 5 years, seemed to startle her back to the present. She flinched, her weeping hiccuping to a stop as she looked up at him through swimming eyes, confusion and raw pain battling in her gaze. "The car, Kayamika," he repeated, his voice softening only a fraction, a hint of warmth breaking through the urgency. "Now." He then turned his attention to the boys. Crouching down to bring himself to their eye level, the expensive fabric of his suit pants instantly soaked in the dirty street water. The 3 pairs of wide, terrified eyes locked onto his, their innocence stark against the backdrop of the storm. "It's okay," he said, and the words, simple and direct, were meant for them alone. "You're safe. Come with me." He held out a hand, not to one, but an open gesture to all 3, inviting them into a world where fear would not reign. Alyawadabi, the little defender, looked from Deiji's face to his mother's, his own small jaw working as he processed the scene. After a heartbeat of supreme childhood calculation, he reached out and took Deiji's offered pinky finger. The touch, small and warm and trusting, sent a jolt through Deiji more powerful than any stock market win, a reminder of the stakes at hand. That was the signal. Alya Wadamalade and Alya Wazian, seeing their brothers lead, shuffled forward, pressing close to their father. Deiji didn't try to carry them. He simply rose, a towering, drenched protector, and shepherded them, a tiny, wet, confused flock, toward the open door of the Bentley. Emeka, who had been watching the scene unfold with his heart in his throat, sprang into action. He helped usher the boys into the profound, silent luxury of the back seat, where the world outside faded into a distant memory. Deiji then turned back to Kayamika. He offered his arm, not as a romantic gesture, but as a lifeline. After a final, stunned hesitation, she took it, her fingers cold and light as bird bones on his soaked sleeve. He guided her into the car, into the seat beside their children, where she could feel the warmth of their presence. He paused for just a second before following them in. He looked back at the empty space under the leaking awning, at the discarded umbrella, at the rain-washed patch of pavement where his past and future had violently merged. It was a moment of reckoning, a farewell to the ghosts that had haunted him for too long. He was leaving that ghost behind. He was collecting his own. As he settled into the car, a sense of urgency filled him. The world of pounding rain and hostile streets was instantly muted, replaced by the quiet hum of the climate control and the sound of 3 small, hitched breaths. The command had been executed. The rescue, however belated, had begun. They were inside, safe for the moment. The long journey out of the rain and into the reckoning was finally underway. Then, he slid into the car, pulling the heavy doors shut behind him. The world of pounding rain and hostile streets was instantly muted, replaced by the quiet hum of the climate control and the sound of 3 small, hitched breaths. The command had been executed. The rescue, however belated, had begun. They were inside. The long journey out of the rain and into the reckoning was finally underway. Stories in the sanctuary. The transition was surreal. One moment, the world was a cacophony of rain, cold, and desperate public shame. The next, they were enveloped in a capsule of hushed, lamplit warmth that smelled of rich leather and sandalwood. The triplets sat perfectly still on the butter-soft leather, their eyes like saucers, afraid to touch anything. Kayamika shivered violently, though the car was warm, her body trembling from shock and the residual chill. Deiji shrugged out of his ruined suit jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was automatic, practical, but the weight of the soaked, expensive fabric seemed to anchor her. She pulled it tight, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on her sons as if to verify they were still there. The Bentley glided smoothly through the now gleaming streets, leaving the tumult of Victoria Island for the serene, tree-lined boulevards of Ikoyi. No one spoke. The only sounds were the swish of the wipers and the soft, classical music from the speakers, a world away from the Accra Friars' hiss. As the towering, wrought-iron gates of the Adeniran estate swung open, the boys gasped in unison. The mansion, a graceful white colonial behemoth, was lit up like a palace, its gardens shimmering under the retreating storm. Kayamika stiffened. This was the source of the envelope, the heart of the machine that had cast her out. Inside, the quiet efficiency of the staff was a ballet of discretion. A warm bath was drawn. Soft, brand-new clothes, pajamas for the boys, a simple, elegant dress for Kayamika, appeared as if by magic. A late supper of steaming pepper soup, soft umla, and grilled fish was laid out in the intimate breakfast room, not the vast, intimidating dining hall. It was over this meal, with the boys finally giggling as they tentatively poked at the fluffy umla, that the dam broke. Deiji, having changed into dry clothes, sat opposite her. He didn't eat. He just watched his family discover the concept of abundance. Kayamika, he began, his voice rough. What happened? After the cafe? She stared into her bowl of soup, the steam rising to kiss her face. For a long time, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a flat, exhausted tone that held volumes of pain, she began to speak. She shared her story of being exiled from Enugu, a place that once felt like home. It was a bittersweet tale, one filled with the grinding noise of a machine that his family had bought as a consolation. It felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of what they had lost. She described the single room in Ajij, where she had to calculate every naira just to survive. It was a life stripped down to the bare essentials, where every day was a challenge, and hope felt like a distant dream. Then came the moment of birth, a whirlwind of emotions. She spoke of the shock that hit her when she heard the second cry, a sound that echoed in her heart, followed by the terror of the third. Her voice trembled as she recounted this, and for the first time, her gaze met his across the table, and it felt like the air thickened with unspoken truths. "I saved for one," she whispered, her confession haunting and raw. "I planned for one. They gave me three." In that moment, her words carried not just the weight of pain, but an awe that was almost palpable, a wonder at the life she never expected. She painted a picture of the years that followed, a life dictated by the arithmetic of triplets. The nights were long and filled with fear, where she had to summon every ounce of strength just to keep going. The pride she felt was like a crust around her heart, a protective layer that kept her desperation at bay. She didn't say it out loud, but he could hear the loneliness in the silences between her sentences. And while she didn't mention missing him, he felt it in the way she lovingly named their sons: Alyawadabi, Alyawadamalade, Alyawazian, names that were prayers to God, not just labels for an absent father. When she finally finished, the room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft, contented slurping of the boys, who were now warm and full. Deji had listened without interruption, each revelation hitting him like a lash across the conscience he'd tried so hard to numb. After a moment, he found his voice, thick with emotion. "They told me you accepted. They told me it was handled. They sent me away before I could even fight." His eyes flickered to his sons, who were leaning sleepily against their mother, innocent and unaware of the storm that had raged around them. "I inherited everything, Kayamika, but I lost everything that truly mattered. My parents, they're gone. The plane crash took them from me." Her eyes widened, a flicker of something passing through them, not sympathy, but a grim understanding that resonated deeply. The architects of her misery were dead, and the prison guards had vanished, leaving only the prisoner and the exiled prince in a hollow kingdom. "I came back to a house of ghosts," he said, his gaze sweeping the opulent room before returning to her. "And today, I found my only reason to live outside of it." He didn't gesture to the wealth surrounding them. Instead, he pointed to her and to the three drowsy boys. The sanctuary he offered wasn't just the mansion, but the truth finally spoken and the staggering, humbling chance to make amends. The courting of a queen, the days that followed were nothing short of a quiet revolution within the once silent mansion. Deji, understanding the weight of what had transpired, didn't rush for a fairy tale ending. He knew trust, especially trust that had been shattered and buried for 5 long years, wasn't something you could just declare. It had to be rebuilt with consistent, daily proof, right? His first act wasn't some grand romantic gesture, but rather a thoughtful logistical one. He transformed a sunny, airy wing of the house into a kingdom for the boys. And this wasn't done with impersonal, expensive toys ordered through a fancy assistant. No, he took them himself to a massive toy store in Acacia. Can you imagine the thrill? Watching his sons wander the aisles, their eyes wide with wonder and disbelief, was a moment he cherished deeply. Alyawadabi picked out a set of construction vehicles. Alyawadamalade reached for a giant box of intricate Lego, and Alyawazian, oh my heart, clung to a plush lion that was almost as big as he was. Deji bought it all, and seeing the joy on their faces, that uncomplicated wonder, was like a soothing balm on a wound he hadn't even realized was still bleeding. With Kayamika, he treaded carefully. He didn't rush into declarations of love, not yet. Instead, he focused on respect. He didn't just hire a nanny. He brought in a renowned pediatrician for a full checkup and a gentle, older woman as a personal assistant for her, to handle anything she might need. He made sure she had space, giving her a suite far from his own, ensuring she felt like an honored guest, not a captured prize. It was all about making her comfortable, you know? But he made it a point to be present. He started leaving the office by 4 p.m. just to find her in the garden, watching the boys play. He'd stand beside her, sharing that comfortable silence. It wasn't awkward, it felt right. He asked her opinions, not just about the boys, but about things that reminded her of her old self. He brought her books on law and investigative journalism, casually mentioning, "I heard there's a new nonprofit focusing on justice for market women. Their founder could really use a sharp legal mind. If you were ever interested." Little nudges, you know? He was courting her, but not the girl she had been. No, he was courting the formidable queen she had become. He noticed how her eyes tracked the boys, still holding onto the ghost of fear that their comfort could be snatched away. So, he made their security legal and unassailable. He summoned his lawyers and, with Kayamika seated beside him, set up irrevocable trusts for each of the triplets. He wanted to ensure their futures were ironclad, separate from any whim of his or market fluctuations. That was love, right there. One evening, he found her alone in the library, running her fingers over the spines of leather-bound books she'd never dared touch before. "My parents built this room to intimidate," he said from the doorway, making her jump. He walked in, and with a smile, added, "I always hated it. It feels like a museum. I was thinking we could turn it into something else. A study. For you. For when you go back to school." Her guard was up, but he could see her eyes shimmering with curiosity. "Why are you doing all this, Deji?" "The money. The things you don't have to," she said, and he felt the weight of her words. He met her gaze, holding it steady. "The money is nothing. It's dust. I'm doing this," he said, his voice low and fervent, "because you deserve a throne, because they deserve a father, and because I need to learn how to be a man, not just an heir. You are teaching me. Let me learn." That moment was pivotal. The ice around her heart didn't melt in a dramatic cascade. It dripped slowly but surely. She saw him on the floor, building wobbly Lego towers with Alyawadamalade, patiently listening to Alyawadabi's elaborate stories about his toy trucks. He soothed a nightmare-frightened Alyawazian with a voice that was a soft, rumbling lullaby. He was there, truly there. He wasn't perfect, of course. The ghost of his past privilege sometimes showed, a moment of impatience here, an assumption made there. But each time, he caught himself. He apologized. He learned. And that was what mattered. Weeks later, one afternoon, she sought him out in his home office. He was working, but he shut his laptop instantly when he saw her. "Kayamika," he said, his heart racing. She stood before his desk, looking more like the proud girl from Unilag than she had in years. "Alyawazian asked me today if Daddy was going to live with us forever," she said, her voice steady but soft. Deji's breath caught in his throat. He waited, his heart pounding. "I didn't know what to tell him," she admitted, taking a deep breath. "So I told him to ask you himself." That wasn't just a question. It was something much deeper, an offering of trust. It was the permission for him to build an answer, day by day, in the hearts of his sons, and in the space she was slowly, bravely, making for him in her own life. The courting of the queen was working. She was allowing him to prove that his kingdom wasn't the mansion, but the family he had found in the rain, and that he was willing to serve, not just rule. Crowns at the altar. The sun over Marino was gentle, not the furious, life-beating force of the rainy season, but a warm, golden blessing. It streamed through the stained glass windows of the Cathedral Church of Christ, casting pools of jeweled light on the assembled guests. The air buzzed not with the usual gossip of high society, but with a profound, joyful awe. At the altar, Deji Adeniran stood tall in a crisp agbada of ivory and gold. He wasn't just a burdened heir anymore. He was a man rooted in certainty. His eyes were fixed on the arched doors at the back of the cathedral, heart racing with anticipation. The ghosts of his past, the demanding father, the strategic mother, were silent today. The only legacy that mattered was about to walk toward him. And then, the great doors swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. There, framed in sunlight, stood Kayamika. Her wedding iro and bubo weren't some flashy designer creation, but a masterpiece of subtlety and meaning. The lace was delicate, like a spider's web, and the color was a soft champagne that seemed to hold the morning light within its threads. On her head, a geli was tied with a majestic simplicity that spoke of a queen claiming her birthright, not borrowing a crown. In her hands, she held a simple bouquet of white lilies and native orchids. But it was her face that truly captivated the room. The exhaustion, the fear, the defensive pride were all gone, washed away by months of security, respect, and a love patiently rebuilt. She glowed with a serene, powerful joy that made her more beautiful than any memory Deji held. And beside her, anchoring her to this new earth, were their three knights. Alyawadabi, Alyawadamalaid, and Alyawazian, resplendent in miniature abada that matched their fathers. They walked with a solemn, adorable gravity, each holding a small, velvet pillow. On them rested not rings, but three simple, perfect golden pendants, each inscribed with their name and the date. As the processional hymn swelled, Kayamika began her walk, her sons forming a perfect guard of honor around her. Their eyes met, and in that look traveled the entire journey. The library debates, the cruel cafe, the grinding machine, the shocking delivery room, the rainy awning, the silent dinners, the shared laughter in the new garden. It was a look of forgiven hurt, of hard-won trust, and of a future fiercely chosen. She reached him. The boys, their duty done, grinned up at their father before scurrying to the front pew to sit with a beaming, tearful Marta. The priest's voice was rich and solemn. The vows they exchanged were not just promises, they were corrections of history. I, Deji, take you, Kayamika, to be my wife, to cherish you, and to honor the profound strength you carried alone, which I now vow to support for all my days. I, Kayamika, take you, Deji, not just as the man before me, but as the father who has returned to claim his own, and the partner who has earned a place in my heart anew. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, a shout of pure, unfettered joy erupted not from the dignified guests, but from the front pew. The triplets, unable to contain their excitement, jumped up and cheered, their little voices ringing through the cathedral. The congregation burst into laughter and thunderous applause. Deji lifted Kayamika's veil. He saw no trace of the storm. He saw his wife. He kissed her, and the taste was of promise, not of rain. Later, under a shower of confetti and rose petals, they emerged into the sun-drenched courtyard. The boys, now crowned with tiny party hats, danced around them. The lack that had defined their first 5 years was a forgotten ghost. In its place was the overflowing abundance of a love that had been tested by fire, flood, and forsakenness, and had emerged not just intact, but triumphant. They were no longer a billionaire and the woman he found begging. They were king and queen, parents to 3 princes, architects of a kingdom built not on cold transactions, but on a love that had weathered the deepest rejection to find its way home, crowned in grace and laughter forever. Thank you for following the emotional journey of Deji and Kayamika, a story of loss, betrayal, impossible strength, and a love that conquered pride, class, and time. If this story moved you, please tap the like button to let us know. For more powerful Nigerian stories of love, redemption, and destiny, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Your support helps us bring more life-changing stories to you. Like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Thank you for watching. Red Heart. See you in the next story.